paid good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Prince in his first motion picture.
Don't lie. Words you're living in.
Before he created the music, he lived every bit of it.
I call my old lady for a friendly word. Picked up the phone, dropped it on the floor. That's all I heard. I'm gonna let the elevator break us down. Oh no, let's go. Go crazy. Let's get nuts. Look for the purple banana till they put us in the truck. Let's go. Come on, baby.
He risked too much for the one thing that meant everything. His music. Prince. The story.
Let's go crazy.
The struggle. The movie. Purple Rain. Welcome to the projection booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Mr. Bill Ackerman.
I wish you could see my home. It's so exciting.
Also back in the booth is Ms. Samm Deighan.
Motherfucker!
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to get through this thing called Purple Rain. Great movie, Purple Rain, and I'm here to tell you it was directed by first-time feature director Albert Magnoli. The film stars the one and only artist formerly and presently known as Prince as the Kid. He's a musical genius from Minneapolis who struggles with his art, his family, and his love life, all set to the amazing sound of Prince, The Time, Apollonia 6, and more. We will be spoiling the film as we go along, so if you haven't seen Purple Rain, what the hell are you doing here? Just turn off the podcast, come on back after you have. We will still be here. So, Bill, when was the first time you saw Purple Rain, and what did you think?
The first time I saw Purple Rain, I was 8 years old. It was during the summer of 1985 when it premiered on HBO. My mother had recorded it for me with a remote control in her hand, trying to edit out all the R-rated components in real time, although she wasn't quick enough to edit out the word motherfucker, so that's the first time I heard the word motherfucker. And I didn't know what it meant, because in the context of the film, I thought he's beating up the mother, and I thought it had something to do with violence. I was way off. That was my first R-rated film along with The Thing, so just seeing it at that age felt really transgressive and edgy. I didn't really think too deeply about movies at that age. I was just excited to see Prince in a movie because he was like one of the biggest things in pop music. And that was when I was still only like a year or so into buying tapes for the first time. Like I'd bought Thriller and Culture Club and a few other things, but it was like still a new thing to be buying pop music. And so just seeing Prince in a movie was like a really big deal. I was asking all the older kids about it who had seen it because it was just like this forbidden fruit kind of film for me. But I didn't really think about it in any kind of deeper way until I was a little older. At the time, it was just everything that felt like hyperbolic and emotionally overwrought about Purple Rain just played as completely straight and reasonable to me at that age. It wasn't like even that exaggerated a film. This is how people act at that age. But I liked it then. I grew to love it as I grew to understand Prince and his music a little better.
And Sam, how about yourself?
I honestly can't remember the first time I saw this. I think it's just like always been in my brain, probably because the music videos that are taken from the movie were on when I was growing up, and I got pretty into Prince early in high school, and I watched it soon after that. But same thing with Bill. It's the more I came to love Prince's music, it's not perfectly made, but it's a perfect film, if that makes sense.
I don't know how I missed out on this. I remember those music videos, so I saw the clips and things, but I never sat down to watch this until I was working at a cable company when I got out of college. And so obviously we had free cable at the office where I worked, and you just had cable on all the time in the break rooms and every single room of the building, basically. And there was one day where I went in for lunch and Purple Rain was on. So it was already in progress. And I sat down and I was just like, this is amazing. Oh my God, how have I missed this? And then fortunately, since it was on cable, I went home and it was on again. So I watched it straight through from the beginning all the way to the end. So I was probably, I was 12 when it came out, and I was probably 22 or 23 when it finally hit me. And I was just like, this is the best thing ever.
I'm glad we all agree.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. And it just, yeah, those heightened emotions. It's so melodramatic, and just the use of the music. And I really just never bought any Prince music when I was younger. And now I have the soundtrack, probably like 3 or 4 different versions of the soundtrack. I never went before or after. Like, I know some of those songs, Little Red Corvette was everywhere when you were that age in 1999. And then, of course, Bat Dance. Oh, my God. Bat Dance. I was so into that stupid video and song. And it was so bizarre to go see Batman after you've heard that song like so many times. And then you hear the people say the dialogue that you've listened to the clips of so many times. I don't know how many months before Batman came out, the music video for Bat Dance came out, but I felt like I had the whole thing memorized, and like it was just part of my being at that point. Prince was amazing, and we'll definitely be talking about that. And it's just amazing for me seeing this when I saw it at age 24 or whatever, 22. I was just like, oh, well, of course Prince made a movie. Yeah, that makes total sense. But then to realize, no, he really, he had the 1999 album, but it didn't really do that well in the charts. And so it was kind of a weird thing that he was able to make a movie at this point in his career and to make it this amazing. Just, it's mind blowing.
He had an album in the charts because 1999 was a platinum album, but it wasn't like a multi-platinum. He wasn't like as big as he got. And that record actually sold a lot more after Purple Rain. But right before this, we have Saturday Night Fever in 1970, really 78 is when it takes over, but 77. And you have Flashdance right before this. And I feel like those kind of set the stage for Purple Rain in a big way. But those films take things that are very maybe gay or effeminate or like things that are not macho, like disco and like synth pop kind of things. And they like try to push a hetero, like macho kind of thing about like disco is really thing about Italian American guys. Like, it's not a gay thing. It's not a black thing. It's making it like palatable for middle class white America. And Flashdance is taking something like underground disco and making it into a strip club, like hetero friendly thing with the sexualizing of the character. Purple Rain is taking Prince when he's still perceived as like kind of a post-disco figure and like someone that's playing with gender and gender fluidity in a way that is like still edgy, post-Bowie that way. And it's taking it and no, it's reselling him as a rock star, a heterosexual rock star. And it's making him more white friendly. Like the band is more white. Vanity is replaced by a more white looking actress. Like it's positioning him for a crossover in a way that made people slightly uncomfortable in some corners, but ultimately the majority was like, yes, this is a good thing. And now he's the new Michael Jackson now. But that's interesting looking back at it as a black film when black films were really being pushed to the margins in a big way other than Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy and comedies. And I don't know that's ever really talked about that way because even though it's almost all black characters, it was just such a big crossover film to white people that I don't know that it was ever really talked about because race is never discussed in the dialogue. But I thought that was something that was always interesting about Purple Rain, that at the time it was just like, oh, it's the new Thriller in the movies and it's R-rated. But looking back, it's culturally interesting also just in the way they were rebranding Prince.
It's like I can see that's what they're trying to do, but it's so hard for me to watch it and not see it as an unintentional queer film. It's like knowing about Wendy and Lisa's relationship and how central they are as side characters. And Prince takes that post-Bowie, post-glam stuff to even more extremes. yes, the whole thing is about his relationship with Apollonia in a lot of ways, but it's like even his on-stage dancing, like his dancing for Darling Nikki is extremely effeminate.
Well, I'm trying to remember the story, if it was Magnoli or if it was one of the producers, and they were out in, I think it was Los Angeles, and taking a cab, and one of them's like, well, what do you think about Prince? And the cab driver, who was a black man, is like, oh, I don't pay attention to that homosexual slur. And it's like, okay, yeah, he was definitely seen that way by a lot of people. And yeah, he's mad feminine in this movie. He really does a great job of crossing that line. And I know at one point Morris Day calls him a slur for homosexuals and talks about how, he's got this long hair and stuff. But yeah, it's amazing that he can play this basically heterosexual sex symbol, but I can see how he could appeal to everyone with the way that he is with his sexuality.
It's wild. Even just like the purple motorcycle, it's like when you think about queer and queer-coded music icons from the 80s, like comparing Prince and Purple Rain to somebody like Rob Halford would be really interesting. The way it's like someone is using these tropes against the tropes. Well, in opposite ways for both of them.
I dove deep into the research with this one, and I'm so glad that there's so many books written about Prince and so many things about Prince, and that even on, and thank you, Bill, for pointing out that there's the double DVD set out there where one whole disc is just dedicated to extras. You've got a whole concert on there. But the fascinating thing for me was seeing the MTV premiere party for it. That was amazing, just to see all the people that showed up for it and like looking around in the crowds and seeing all these stars that were big in 1984, to have fucking Weird Al there. Just like, oh yeah, well, we knew that Prince could act, but wow, that he can sing too.
Warner was like a partial owner of MTV. Warner Brothers owns the film, they own the record label, and they partly own MTV. This is when that corporate synergy way of marketing music was still in its infancy. It's the same. It's right after Flashdance, but it's the same year as you have Footloose, which is like all marketing. And like before that, you have Isaac Hayes and Curtis Mayfield and the Bee Gees, and other music artists that like benefited from movie soundtracks in a major way. But this is different because this also is like a benefit of timing, because it's like Thriller is still like the biggest thing in the world in 84, and that came in 82. It was like that enormous that it was still like in the top of the chart. Thriller, the video came out in January of that year. So he's still like, everything else falls second to Michael Jackson. The point that Purple Rain is made, but it benefits from the Michael Jackson effect. Is like, what if we had another one? What if we had another Michael Jackson? What if we had him in the movies? And Prince was already established. Little Red Corvette was on MTV before Billie Jean even. So he was already positioned for it. But the impact of MTV on all of this, you can't underestimate it, because that, even just we're talking about the androgyny of it. The push towards androgyny in pop music around this time was so much different than it prior to that. Because in the 70s, you had glam in England, but because they had things like Top of the Pops that were so culturally resonant, I don't think it had the same impact here, because unless it was like blended with horror, like Kiss or Alice Cooper, like you didn't really have the same push for glam in America until MTV really brought it into like regular rotation. And then heavy metal becomes more glam, R&B becomes more glam, and Prince was just positioned to coalesce all of it. 'Cause Purple Rain, like you think about 1984 as a year for pop music, and it's Born in the USA, it's Thriller, it's Like a Virgin, it's Depeche Mode, it's Van Halen. And I feel like Purple Rain kind of synthesizes so much of what was hot in all these different areas in a way that like makes it a really interesting crossover record, in a way that like his other albums don't really attempt that. But it's very calculated that way too, which is interesting because it actually works to cross over. Like where something like Batman is also calculated, but it doesn't age the same way because the substance is not really there for a lot of those songs. It's more kind of a curiosity, whereas Purple Rain still holds up as a listening experience.
How many of those songs were written before the movie was conceived, and how many were written for the movie? Because I've always been, and this is something that we can definitely get into more later, But one of the things I love so much about this movie is the way that it feels like a bizarre hybrid of kind of a concert film and music videos and a musical. And some of the songs are so good at moving the narrative forwards in a way that I feel like you don't see that often.
Baby, I'm a Star is the only one that I know was around for a while, but everything else was written around the time of Purple Rain, which is different from Graffiti Bridge, for example, or Batman, where he had songs that were much older, reworked for those projects. But yeah, no, this was a case where before Purple Rain, Prince was like an album a year, and he wasn't taking a lot of time, and he would get bored really quickly with each record. By the time he was done with the tour, he's like, forget it, I'm on to the next thing. He was recording. By the time Purple Rain came out, Around the World in a Day was almost done. He was already done with that music by the time.
That's crazy.
Yeah. He was working that fast. And that's also the same year he wrote a Sheila E. album, a Time album, the Family album, Apollonia 6's album.
I love that Family album.
Yeah. Like, he was really like dominating the charts in a big way, because that's the same year as Cyndi Lauper was big, which She's So Unusual has a cover of When You Were Mine. And then Shaka Khan had a comeback because of a cover of I Feel For You. Glamorous Life was on the chart. So it was like, before Purple Rain, he would get so impatient that he wouldn't really allow an album to work on radio, tour it, support it, release singles, promote the record the way that other people do. 1999 had 2 years to gestate, which is rare for him. And so that was why it belatedly crossed him over with Little Red Corvette. But if he had it his own way, he would work so fast that by the time people start to digest the record, he was like, nah, I'm tired of that. I'm on to the next thing. And so
he's like the Fassbender of pop music.
Well, it's
just tireless.
That's why he likes Michael Bauhaus.
It's not a coincidence that Amadeus came out the same year, I feel, because it feels like he is the modern day Amadeus, just cranking through stuff, has all this music in his head, and he's just rushing to put it down. There's a great book called Prince in the Purple Rain Era Studio Sessions by Deighan Tudahall, I believe it's pronounced, but that is great because it will tell you exactly when these songs were being laid down, at least. And the songs, just one after another, and you can see the dates of when these things were being recorded. And yeah, it's remarkable to see just the output. And according to Magnoli, when he and Prince initially got together on this, once Prince agreed, like, you can do this, I think Prince played him 100 songs or something. And he was just like, take whatever songs you want. And there were some that were used, like you were saying, like Baby I'm a Star, but there were some that were recorded like right before stuff. I mean, there are 3 songs that are played in the movie that he actually played live and then reworked. And it's those versions that are in the movie, like Purple Rain itself. So you can hear some of the crowd stuff, and that's the actual crowd as far as I understand. And then a couple of them were written for the movie, just like, hey, we need a song here. And then he comes back with When Doves Cry. It's like, what?
Which is so crazy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think that and Take Me With You were written specifically for the movie.
Yes. Yeah. And The Beautiful Ones also was. Yeah. But yeah, I Would Die For You, Baby I'm a Star, and Purple Rain are all from that First Avenue, that concert, like a benefit concert for the Dance Academy from '83, which was Wendy's first show. And I think they recorded Let's Go Crazy there too, but they ended up re-recording it in a warehouse because they just wanted to try something else with it. But yeah, it's interesting how fast it all comes together.
To your point, he's writing all of those time songs too. So he's writing freaking The Bird and what's the other big one from
Jungle
there?
Love.
Jungle Love. It's like all of the Apollonia songs, and it's just, I think maybe he didn't write Modern Air, but I bet you he did as well.
No, he didn't write Modern Air that I know of, but it sounds awfully like his stuff.
It's crazy. I still find things in recent years that are so clearly influenced by his sound in pop music. I didn't realize that he wrote all this other pop music. Like, it blows your mind.
Yeah, the Apollonia 6 record, had he not gutted it, would have had Take Me With You, Glamorous Life, Manic Monday, some really big songs. Sex Shooter wound up being just the biggest thing just because that's all that was really left of the songs he even tried to write. But yeah, no, it was interesting, like how prolific and how many keeper songs of all of that recording he had. Because I don't know. I don't know. I mean, he has so many songs we haven't heard yet, so it's hard to say.
Which is, it's like hard to get your brain around someone just having this vault of like thousands of songs that they wrote because they just were bored all the time.
Luckily, when I did finally watch Purple Rain, one of my coworkers, his sister was a huge Prince fan. And so he had picked up all this information from having her as his sister. So he's like, oh yeah, he's got all these songs and vaults, and he's telling me all these things about the backwards recordings, you know, the backwards messages that are in Purple Rain and this. And I'm just like, okay, I had no idea just how amazing this guy was until that moment. It just all hit right at the same time.
Bill, you've seen him a few times,
I saw him
right?
twice.
We saw him together at, was it the very last show he played? Second to last?
It was one of them. It was like a Freddie Gray memorial.
It was when there were those riots in Baltimore. I was living there at the time, and the show went on sale, and I was like, we have to go because I will never have another chance. And it was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. Like the sheer shredding. He didn't do the stage humping anymore, but...
Well, the dancing, just this dancing is freaking amazing.
Yes.
When he dances in Little Red Corvette, the video, you're just like, holy shit. Like, yeah, I was a huge Michael Jackson fan back when Purple Rain came out. So I was right there. You were talking, Bill, about Thriller and just that long gestation period for Thriller. I was all about Thriller, and, you know, which is why I guess the whole pederasty thing really hurts even more, because I was such a big fan and just feel very betrayed. But I was just like, yeah, Michael Jackson, he's such a great dancer. And, you know, I actually watched the performance where he did the moonwalk the first time and all this. And then I go and I watch, you know, Little Red Corvette, and I'm just like, holy shit, this guy puts Michael Jackson to shame. He's amazing.
and
so
in
good.
heels. He's like the Ginger Rogers.
Huge heels.
Yeah, but they both were drawing on James Brown in a big way. So that also helped bring James Brown back for another round, because after this, James Brown has Living in America for the Rocky soundtrack. And that was also, in a way, benefiting from just the increased exposure for R&B frontmen and the influence by him with Prince and Michael Jackson. So something about the time I thought was interesting is when you look at how they're used in Purple Rain, everything about them is from Prince. The music is from Prince. Morris Day's character is based on Prince's own behavior. And it's interesting how they're the black side of Prince as an artist. And he's trying to embrace the white rock pop audience at that time. But he still wants Jungle Love out there. Like he still wants to play to the R&B audience. But it's funny because they're his antagonists in the story. And like they are the Frankenstein monster that he wouldn't let them open certain shows when they toured together because he was afraid that they would blow him off stage because they were that good. Like all of his protege acts, so it's, she's cute. She should be the front person for my new band. But whereas the time, he made the mistake of hiring the best people in Minneapolis, and he hired Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis to be in his band, which is like, you don't hire like people that are like going to potentially dominate like 80s pop charts and production to be like your puppets, which is what he did. And so
he tried. Didn't Jimmy Jam wind up just like leaving?
Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis missed a date because they got snowed in recording someone else, like moonlighting as producers. And so he fired them from the time.
They worked with Janet Jackson, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And Human League and a lot of big people. But Janet Jackson is probably who they're most associated with. And if you think about that Minneapolis sound of modern air, like that synth funk sound, like they brought that out in a bigger way than even Prince did, probably, as far as like that sound. But yeah, I just think it's interesting how Morris Day is showing all the sides of Prince that he doesn't want you to know. The choreography, like the rehearsals, the ambition to be famous is something that he plays it as, I'm just an artist expressing myself through music, but the hard driving R&B James Brown taskmaster that Morris Day, that's Prince also. And it's interesting how he's choosing to have the villain play that side of his personality, but that's him too. I just think it's interesting how he's a one-man band that could record the entire record himself, but you don't see that side of him in the movie. It's, oh, he's part of a collaborative band. Wendy and Lisa help write songs. Like he's trying to make it seem like he's a normal musician when it's so funny that he's really the most abnormal person in pop music.
There's so much dialogue, especially in the second half of the movie, where at the club they're yelling at him for writing these really emotional songs that are too personal and they're just for him. And to me, that's the most unbelievable part of the movie, because it's like things like When Doves Cry, and you're talking about like some of the biggest hits of the 80s are supposed to be built into this plot. Like, this music is too obscure. But it is such a good contrast to everything that Morris does. But also, I need to know, and I don't know if either of you know the answer to this, one of my favorite, and we should probably at least briefly address that this film is pretty misogynistic, much like the 80s themselves and the United States. No, so it's not Prince's fault. But there's this incredible scene where Morris and Jerome throw a woman in a dumpster. And since it's based on Prince's life, I'm wondering if he actually threw or had someone thrown in a dumpster.
Albert Magnoli used to say that this is something that happened. I don't know if it happened in the time space or in the Prince and the Revolution space, or I don't think Prince had Chick, the bodyguard, throw anyone in a dumpster. I have no idea. Like, and I have no idea if Albert Magnoli is just talking shit when he says that it's based in fact. But I know that's a scene he did have to fight for, and test audiences loved it, which is
it's one of those scenes I don't want to love, but will always love. Yeah. It's like, to go back to your point about like, why did he hire Morris and all these people who are a real threat to him because they're so talented in their own right? It's Morris and Jerome steal this movie. Oh God,
yes.
They are cartoonish villains in a way, but they have such good chemistry together. And the whole Three Stooges scene of what is the password? Is it what? Is it is? It's just like, it wouldn't be the same movie without the comic relief that they provide.
The film that it reminds me the most of in a lot of ways is the film that Albert Magnoli edited right before this, Reckless. Yeah, it's like part of his like brooding young man with a motorcycle trilogy, because American Anthem also has that. That's a very sober, serious kind of movie, whereas Purple Rain has a lot of humor to it. And yeah, it's all from their rapport. It's if you look at Under the Cherry Moon, one of the things that's funny about that is that Prince is clearly jealous as shit that Morris got to steal the movie from him with all the Jerome scenes. So he basically takes back his persona and applies it onto himself, so that the character he plays in Under the Cherry Moon, he has Jerome himself as his buddy. And they're just going around Paris being obnoxious in white society. They don't actually call up race per se, but it's by taking on that side of himself, it's foregrounding race in a way that Purple Rain does not, by making him like this fish out of water in like wealthy white society with him and Jerome. But it's like him doing a lot of banter that is very Morris Day, but it's more awkward when he does it. So it's one of the many problems that Under the Cherry Moon runs into. But it is noteworthy that it's like him trying to take back what he gave Morris in Purple Rain.
I love that this whole movie basically boils down to a battle of the bands at the end of it. It's just, okay, we've got not enough spaces and too many bands, so who's going to win this contest and become, the one of the house bands here at First Avenue? And it's great. I love that he's the winner, and basically it's like when he plays and he ends up going down into the basement and the camera's following him through all of these corridors, and then he finally realizes that the crowd is cheering for him because, yeah, Sam, like you're saying, how dare you play all these obscure songs? Nobody's going to dig this. The one thing that I love is when they play a song, then they leave the stage, and Billy Sparks is like, what's with this one song shit? And I'm like, oh yeah, I guess he does just play one song almost every single time. Like you kind of buy into that idea from movies of when there's a song, a singer gets up, sings one song, and that's pretty much it. Like they don't continue on, and it's like, oh, I'll talk to the singer after the song is done. It's not like, 45 minutes later, it's 5 minutes later when the song is done, they come and they sit down. And so it took me a long time to realize, like, oh yeah, he's just playing one song and just thinks it's the best thing. So he just walks right off the stage. And when he gets called out for it, I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of breaking film tradition here by actually calling him out for just playing the one.
One of the only scenes where you see them play multiple songs is that really angry sort of climax moment where he's targeting Apollonia and makes the songs feel like they belong in the film narratively, and it's not just we're up here to perform. It's like this song is about what's happening in my life right now.
Yeah, there was actually a song I love that was cut out of the film, and I used to think that it was replaced by Darling Nikki, but the script, looking at it, it was actually before that. It was a song called G-Spot, which later came out as a Jill Jones song, but the idea was that he was doing the kind of funk that The Time does, which is like a musical thing that doesn't translate probably to some listeners the same way that like emotionally direct lyrics, like attacking Apollonia or speaking to her through song does. So I guess I get why they cut it, but it's a good song. I wish they had kept it, but
when he sings, "Do you want him or do you want me? 'Cause I want you," and he just is screaming that out, I get fucking chills every single time, man.
Yep.
Oh, it's so good.
Going back to that contrast between him in the film and the Times music, you could kind of see it being about like a man trying to address emotions through music when everyone around him is, don't be a fag. Swallow your feelings, man up. There's no crying in baseball. But it's like learning how to embrace that side of himself is ultimately what makes him win the Battle of the Bands. It's such an insanely simple plot that feels more complicated because of those unspoken racial issues and also the family issues.
Oh boy, yeah. Well, yeah, he embraces his femininity, but he also embraces that other people can help him and that Wendy and Lisa, even though that's bullshit. That I don't think that they actually had something to do with this
really
one.
Happen?
Yeah. I think if anything, it was more like him and Des Dickerson had stuff where they would actually contribute and things, and he didn't, like eventually Des is out of the band type of thing. But yeah, that whole thing in the movie where it's like, oh, I have to embrace this because he's already started to embrace his father's music. And it took me so long to figure out that what his father is playing ends up becoming part of Computer Blue. And then, the song that he keeps hearing from Wendy and Lisa on that cassette tape, that eventually becomes Purple Rain. The first time I saw it, it just didn't click at all. And then I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, I can see how this music is actually working in here. So it's pretty clueless in my early 20s.
I always wondered if the reason that he uses his father's music in Computer Blue is to help his old man have a paycheck from his huge record, because his dad gets a piece of one of the biggest albums of the 80s that way. But he could have clearly written that melody or some other kind of equivalent melody on his own. So and father's song was also supposed to be on an early iteration of the record. So it's still in the movie, but that melody was partly like a gift to his old man. And I guess they mended fences a little bit after Purple Rain took over the world, but they had a weird relationship when he was growing up that is part of what, I don't know that his dad was violent, but he was somebody that was a very unhappy and frustrated, talented musically, but difficult character in a way that Prince could have easily just gone that road had he not made certain choices to make him famous.
Prince was also pretty difficult. It just translated in a different way.
Yeah, that's very true.
And you're talking about this whole fracturing of Prince's personality into things like the Apollonia 6 and The Time and things. And this whole movie is about being fractured. I mean, he also, he talks to people through a puppet.
Those scenes are so unexpected. The first time I saw it, I was like, what is happening?
And even the opening montage is all fragmented when it comes to timeline, because it's got him on stage performing, but then also getting ready for the performance and having this whole, I love that they kind of cop to this idea that it's the settling of the scores in The Godfather, all the five families, and just seeing that montage as you've got Michael, baptizing his godson. And then that you even have Apollonia having her name being taken from The Godfather, because she wasn't Apollonia until she ended up meeting Prince. Kind of like a lot of people end up getting weird names when they hang out with Prince. I'm looking at you, Carmen Electra.
Aside from Wendy and Lisa, who have the most normal names.
The Apollonia name it is a Godfather reference, but it's also rebranding a Mexican-American actress as Italian, like the Italian mother. So it's another way of making someone that is not white seem white.
I like that because the mother is played by a Greek actress. She's Greek, right?
From that name, I would think so.
Sam, this was something I was going to ask you yesterday. Olga Carlatos, do you know who she is? She gets the splinter in the eye in Zombie.
Yes. I was like, I know her from Fulci movies, but I know
She was starring in Murder Rock the same year that Purple Rain came out.
she's in some more Kioma and more just Euro cult in general. And having her be clearly Mediterranean looking actor, it gives her this ambiguity that it's interesting that they never address it. But the fact that she and Apollonia do look similar in a certain way, it's like he's obviously trying to become something more than he grew up with, but is having trouble resisting the same patterns repeating themselves.
Yeah, when he smacks, you got the father hitting the wife, and then within, I think it's the next scene, you've got Prince hitting Apollonia, and it's just like, oh, here he goes. He's just falling into that same pattern. And then later on, it's him about to, and then he realizes that he's about to, and then he ends up, not doing that. It's pretty simple stuff, but it works. It works very well.
The script had this weird Oedipal moment where the mother is drunk and she's looking at herself in the mirror, remembering her youth. And then she has a line like, "You look so pretty, honey, just like me. You could have been a girl," like playing up the androgyny factor, and starts almost flirting with him. And gives the earring that he gives to Apollonia. That's his mother's earring. There was this kind of weird incestual theme. Beyond the violence of the father, there was like this sexual component with the mother that they dropped from the film, but it would have made it a lot more perverse had they retained that.
They should have left it.
That mother, the mother and Jill Jones suffered the most, I think, through the editing of this film. Poor Jill. But yeah, the mother had a lot of stuff, and they just kept chopping it out.
Yeah, Jill Jones had a song called Wednesday that you can find online that was supposed to be right before he gets the card with Apollonia's contact information, maybe. I'm trying to remember the exact positioning of it. But yeah, she was waiting on a solo career that Prince was supposed to give her that ended up happening very belatedly, and nothing really took off with it. But just, she was part of that world for a long time. She's in Graffiti Bridge, also has her part cut down in that one.
How many women did that happen with? At least like a dozen?
At least, yeah. And then it is interesting reading that script and to see he's still Prince in that early version. He's not the kid. And then it's Vanity all through there rather than Apollonia. That Vanity was supposed to be the love interest. Also, Vanity pretty dirty in the script. This whole thing of, and they kind of keep a little bit in that opening montage how Apollonia's in the back of a cab. And you can tell that she doesn't have enough money for the cab, and so she rushes out. And there's supposed to be a whole thing where the kid sees her being questioned by the police, and there's this rich guy or a guy who looks very affluent around this group of people who are just like, gawking at this whole thing. And basically, like, the Vanity character or Vanity hooks up with this guy, and that's why she has all that money, because you can see Apollonia has all that money in her hand. It was basically like she prostitutes herself to this guy in the crowd. At least that's how I read it. I don't know how you read it, Bill.
That's how you're supposed to read it. I did notice that in the script that Vanity is a harder character. She's playing the persona of the Vanity 6 character. And so she's a tougher, like when the Lake Minnetonka scene in the film, Apollonia forgives him and gets on the bike. There's, "Don't get my seat wet." It's not, she's not mad for that long. She's still happy to be with him.
Which is outrageous. She should have been way madder.
Yeah. Whereas Vanity is pissed and she hitches a ride back. Like, she's not putting up with that shit. Like, she's a harder character. Like, and that changes how the scenes with Morris Day play, because in the Times second record, like, she shows up as a character in a skit. Like, there's flirty banter with her and Morris Day. She's Morris's equal in those kind of songs. And had she played the character in Purple Rain, it would have felt like more equal. Whereas maybe I'm misreading it, but those scenes feel like Morris Day comes off slightly more predatory because Apollonia feels more like an innocent like hick trying to break into the business, whereas Vanity would have come off as more experienced, like somebody that would not be beaten by Morris Day no matter what Prince does or doesn't do to help her. It's a more gentler, like softer version of the character for the film we have with Apollonia.
To me, the most interesting parts of Apollonia's character are when she has these scenes with Morris, and the way that Morris wins her over is by being pretty upfront with her and talking very rationally about, look, we both want to get famous and there's nothing wrong with that. And we're not pretending that it's anything other than what it is. But that doesn't mean that we can't party and have fun while trying to make great music and entertain people. And in their scenes together, she feels more equal than in her scenes with just Prince.
He's playing a relatable person. Prince isn't even trying to do that. But I agree that like that scene with Morris letting his guard down, and also the scene where the family scene at the end where he like says something so cold, but then he has that like moment of silent regret in the hall. Like you get so much more emotional complexity than I think a lot of films would have given.
And more nuance. He winds up, even though he is basically it's like it's so confusing about whether he's really the antagonist or not, because he's so much more relatable and funny than Prince's character. It's like Prince's character's funny side shows up as him being eccentric. And like the scenes with him and the puppet and the scenes where he does things that are more effeminate, it's not quite David Bowie otherworldly. It just makes him seem like he's really trying to be different from everyone, but in a way that's hard to put your finger on.
Speaking of put your finger on, like the violence against women between the two characters, Morris Day has someone else put a woman in a dumpster. Like he has his own capacity for violence, but it's different from the kid, where it's like the kid like has this
is going to beat her. Yes. It gets pretty dark.
Oh, yeah. Very, very dark. I mean, When Doves Cry is such a dark song. The first time I heard it, I was just like, what the hell is this?
When Doves Cry is interesting because at the time that dropped, Prince had stopped doing interviews right as 1999 took off. And so as he's getting more famous, he's deliberately cultivating mystique in a major way. Like people are like, what's the story with the little red Corvette guy? Why won't he talk to us? And so all of a sudden he has this song that seems to be laying clues for who he is and why he's complicated. Even though it has one melody, no bass line, it dominates the summer in a way that sets the movie up to take over, because you couldn't get away from it in 1984. It was just like everywhere you went. You saw the video on MTV or you heard the song on the radio, but it seems to be telling you something about who he is, and it's at the same time it's unclear how much of it is an invention for the sake of the movie and for his own myth building, which he was clearly doing with Purple Rain.
Which is some real classic fuckboy behavior. Let's seem as mysterious as possible and cultivate this sense of like darkness, and he's troubled and sad, and so it makes you want to get to know him, but it's all smoke and mirrors.
That he was either instrumental in the casting of a non-African American for his mother, or was just okay with it. You know, that's also adding to the whole thing, because there was a lot of talk of him being mixed race, and he just plays right into it.
But Prince is the only one that actually makes a movie where it's like, oh, my mother's white.
Which makes me wonder how his mother felt when she saw the movie. It was just like, what?
Maybe that was a way that he could say there are some autobiographical elements, but clearly it's not a direct picture of my life.
Even as far back as the controversy saying, well, like the lyrics are like, am I black or white? Am I straight or gay? Like he enjoyed like raising the questions and then not telling you.
He enjoyed controversy so much he wrote a song about it.
Yep. Yeah.
Which also, speaking of, okay, I need to know, do you think this counts as a musical?
Yes.
I think it does, yeah, especially because it's telling stories through songs, and there are just so many darn songs.
I feel like it's a musical, but a musical that is clearly, I know Magnoli spoke about Cabaret being an influence, but I know that this is post-Fame, it's post-Flashdance. It's post Saturday Night Fever, and
It does feel very Fosse influenced.
yeah, the dark musical thing comes from Fosse in a big way. But yeah, no, I do think that it's a film where, yeah, musical selections drive the narrative forward in a way that qualifies it as a musical, in a way that Under the Cherry Moon is not. Graffiti Bridge is even more so than Purple Rain. For better or for worse, it is a musical that way.
For better or worse.
Yes.
We'll get there. We'll get there. One of the things that I like a lot about this movie is that when characters sing, they're singing in the real world. They're not singing in this kind of make-believe world, even though this is very, it's not as set-bound as Graffiti Bridge, and we'll talk about that. But when he is up on stage, or when anybody's up on stage and they're singing, you see all the activity of the club going on. Like, you see the waitress with drinks moving past things. I'm like, oh, okay, this is really nice. It's not just the world stops, Prince is on stage, and that's it. No, we're doing business here. That whole thing of Morris just like, well, I guess money isn't everything, when he's talking with Billy Sparks, not very many people in the club tonight. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay, just really like sticking it to him. Just like, oh, if you want people to bring in the bodies, it's me and it's my new band Apollonia 6. Forget about the kid.
Yeah, it's that competitive thing that, it comes from Prince as much as it comes from Morris Day. I don't know if you thought the same thing watching the opening shots with all the new wave people faces. I always think of Cafe Flesh and Liquid Sky and cult movies that adopt that kind of dynamic before it moves into something totally different. But I know that the origins of Purple Rain probably were a little bit more cultish than the film that ultimately was. I know he had a film that got abandoned called The Second Coming that was a little bit more like an overtly cult movie. It's weird to think about Prince watching Eraserhead and things like that, but apparently he was paying attention to enough in cinema that he was thinking initially a smaller scale kind of movie that was going to be like this cool hip cult movie, but then they decided let's just go all the way. Let's go big. But it could have been a lot stranger than what we have. Maybe more puppets.
You meant to say, let's go crazy.
One person we should shout out, though, is Leroy Bennett, who is the special lighting for the musical numbers. Like, he's not the DP, but the color palettes and choices in lighting are like such a huge component that never gets discussed with Purple Rain. Like, the DP on this was Donald Thorne, who shot Thief for Michael Mann. It's like pretty noteworthy person in his own right. But the lighting for Purple Rain's musical numbers is like the major visual component, I think, for what makes it dynamic. And that guy directed Show, the Cure concert film. And he also worked with people like Madonna, Nine Inch Nails, Lady Gaga, Rammstein. But he was also the lighting guy from Dirty Mind up through the early 90s Prince shows. So he's somebody that doesn't get maybe the same shine as the musicians, but the visual component is coming from him. That's something that, like, when I think about like, the lighting in Let's Go Crazy or Purple Rain, like when the peach light comes in at the climax, it's like, it's a subtle thing that you shouldn't be paying attention to it. But if you watch it just for the sake of something like this, you notice how much that lighting choreography is really key to those songs taking off the way they do.
It's also incredible how different both the lighting and the dance choreography feel between the Revolution and the Time. They look so starkly different. Do you know, did Prince do most of the dance choreography himself? Not that it's super complicated, but it's like somebody definitely put thought into the dance that Prince's band is doing. It's like they do have choreographed moments and they are dancing in unison, but the fact that, as you pointed out earlier, the way that the Time, you can see them rehearsing and it feels much more consciously rehearsed, like they have steps that they're doing, like the bird.
It's a James Brown influence, just that way of putting on a show. But yeah, Prince and the Revolution and the Time, it was like boot camp. Like, they worked those guys and gals like every day, like getting that choreography perfect. Revolution is just as choreographed as the Time. It's just the Time is a lot more overt with the dances.
Yeah, it almost makes me think of a musical like White Christmas or something, where so much of the plot is like you're watching these people rehearse and you're moving back and forth between what does the rehearsal look like and what does the actual performance look like, and blurring the lines between those.
He would rehearse so much, play a show, have everyone watch the show back like it was game film. He would record everything and have everything videoed. And then a lot of times after that, all day long, they're doing this, plus playing the show for however long, watching the tape, and then usually go out and play like a smaller gig at a club. And it's like, what? How are you able to do this every single day? Apparently it was a real thing to make the musicians get up at 7 a.m. for like their calls and everything rather than noon when they usually would get up because they had lived this kind of nocturnal life.
Yeah, I always found that so crazy that they would have these after shows at like small clubs. I can only imagine just they probably a lot more improvisational and just less obligation to play the hits. More pleasure for him as a musician to try stuff.
But also no wonder he burned through people pretty quickly. I'm sure some of it was drug fueled, but it's hard to imagine people being able to keep up that pace forever.
Drugs is interesting because there's a line in the script that got changed, that powder white babe talking, and they change it in a very awkward loop to that Apollonia babe. And it's not because when it was Vanity, it wasn't even like a white person that he was describing. It was a reference to cocaine. And I don't know if it was just, I don't know why they removed all drug references from Purple Rain, but they clearly made a choice to not bring drugs in the picture. And I don't know if that was just because they didn't want to associate black people with drugs, the way that Do the Right Thing also does that later on in the decade. Like they just didn't want any more of that negative kind of messaging. But I know that there's like an anti-drug line in Pop Life, which was recorded right after Purple Rain came out. What are you putting in your nose? Is that where your money goes? And I know that Vanity and Morris Day they had drug problems in the 80s. I don't know if that's part of why they fell out with Prince or not. But Prince, ironically, for someone that had the tragic passing related to drugs, was like a very anti-drug figure in the 80s. And even fined Wendy for drinking a beer while press were around or something. It was like he was that rigid with the chemical component, which is a thing that took down Rick James, one of his adversaries. Like it took down a lot of people in the music industry. It's so funny how squeaky clean he was considering how controversial he was at the same time because of the lyrics and the performance.
In Purple Rain, it even shows up in the drinking scene where Morris and Apollonia are drunk. And it's like, instead of it being directly about illegal drug use, he's, come on, don't do that to yourself. It's like, it takes a pretty clear stance. I might be an abusive, egotistical piece of shit, but alcohol is where I draw the line.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, even the first time they're together, he's buying champagne for her in that great scene where it's like, your most expensive champagne, keep the change. And then how he says to Jerome, get my change back. And
Get my change back.
And I like how he says that loud enough that Apollonia can hear him and just realize what a piece of shit that he is.
In the film, they don't really underline that the mother is a drinker.
No, they don't. Yeah.
In the script, they do. And so that when he's freaking out about Apollonia's drinking in the film, it's partly don't become like my mom.
Maybe you're just like my mother.
Yeah, exactly.
But I wish that they had left some of that in the script because the mother's behavior just makes her seem like a crazy person. If there was a line about how she's frequently drunk to deal with my father, to deal with the abuse, there are scenes where she's sitting and rocking and just her behavior is not like normal middle-class mom behavior. So I feel like you need to explain that in some way.
Yeah, she's institutionalized in Graffiti Bridge. So they basically try to make it seem like that's how you're reading it is like how I ultimately chose to play it. But it was originally grounded in alcoholism.
The ambiguous nature of it could have been resolved with one line of dialogue.
Yeah, I want to say there's even a scene where in the script this is where she's out drinking. Isn't she flirting with other men and stuff? So the whole thing with Clarence Williams III being like, you're seeing other guys. It's like, where is this coming from? But in the script, it seemed like, oh, that's really possible.
Doesn't she get picked up for solicitation or something?
Yeah,
to that,
yeah, I think so.
Essentially.
And having some of that in the film would make his behavior, because without any context, it just makes both of them seem way more unhinged in a randomly chaotic way. Like his dad seems paranoid in a way that you would be if you did a lot of cocaine or a lot of meth or something. Without giving it any justification, it makes his father less relatable.
they make the choice to have these characters be as relatable as parents in a teen movie, which is not at all. They're just the freak show.
They're not there.
Yeah. He describes them as a freak show. That's how they just chose to play it.
How old is he supposed to be? Because he sometimes gives off teenager vibes.
He's supposed to be like early 20s.
Okay.
Enough so that like when he doesn't initially want to take her home because he's embarrassed by living with his parents, that it makes sense.
It's kind of nice that he's got the little entrance way through the almost like cellar doors that he can bring chicks home.
Prince was so, even with Purple Rain, was often so transgressive and confrontational when it came to sex, but so conservative with things like drugs and, in other ways.
And he only got more conservative as he got older. Becoming like that super famous and like having that much pressure on him only drove him further into
to want to control everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But also maybe turning to religion. I know that he always was a religious kind of figure even before all this, but he only dove deeper into that as he got older, especially after he met Larry Graham and got into the Jehovah's Witness thing. But even back when he did Purple Rain, even just like that line, I'm your Messiah or whatever, and I would die for you. Like, he changes that almost right away when they start playing it live because he just felt like a little bit like, I don't know if I should be saying that. He changes
Blasphemy.
the lyrics. Yep, exactly. He starts walking it back almost right away.
But this is also the guy who wrote Dirty Mind and Head and Darling Nikki. It's like, how conservative are you really? I feel like that sense of contradiction is so essential to his persona as a pop star, but also in Purple Rain.
This is also the same year that Marvin Gaye was killed, isn't it? Just like that idea of the spiritual and the sexual kind of commingling in a pop star. He just took that tradition and ran with it. But it's hilarious that Purple Rain is a clear effort to dial back the outrageous behavior that's on Dirty Mind and Controversy in 1999, and it still creates the PMRC just from the one line in Darling Nikki.
Yeah, and by the way, masturbating with a magazine sounds very painful. I was picturing just masturbating to a magazine, but with a magazine just changes everything.
Okay, so I have a theory that she's just rolling it up. She's not inserting it. It's a hell of a line. And when I know that he stopped playing that song decades ago, but when Bill and I saw him, he played maybe 30 seconds of it, and I got so excited, and then he was like, just kidding.
Yeah, apparently the one time, like, he was on stage with some other musicians, then they went into Darling Nikki, he just walked off stage. He's not going to be tricked into playing Darling Nikki.
That bastard.
But he knew that song, what the power of it was, because I remember when he started doing the Diamonds and Pearls era with the New Power Generation, and he was talking about the strengths and weaknesses of that band versus the Revolution. He said that the Revolution was a cold band, and they could do a Darling Nikki because Darling Nikki is the coldest song he had. But it didn't feel as right with his new band, which was like warmer. Do you think that film is a cold song? It's clearly positioned to be a tell-off, but yeah.
My introduction to Prince was somebody gave me that double CD greatest hits collection, which I fell in love with. And I never really saw Darling Nikki as being this nasty, vindictive song. I thought it was just a song about a lady who's going to get her rocks off, and she doesn't. If you're interested in that, great, but otherwise, she doesn't have time for you. I don't think I saw it as insulting until I watched the movie and was like, whoa, this is a whole different song now.
Yeah, no, it sounds like she very much knows what she wants, and, she's got the whole guest book and everything, keeping track of everybody. So she's very much like a manly character where you've got the little, notches on your belt type of thing. But for her, it's more the notch on the lipstick case.
Too much for Prince. He's got to be in charge.
I love that they pay attention to the band, that we get, everybody's kind of got their moments and everything. I really wish there was a lot more Dr. Fink. I would like to know how he got his doctorate. Is it a tradition, is it an honorary doctorate, or did he actually go to funky medical school, or what happened?
They all had more lines in it, although he should probably be grateful that some of those scenes were cut, because there's some scene in the script where they're feeling up Jill Jones in a way that's just out of nowhere and creepy.
The film kind of walks that line of like creepy misogynistic behavior for a lot of it, which is certainly not unique to Purple Rain. You see it in Saturday Night Fever. You especially see it in Staying Alive. You see it in some of the Fosse movies. It just, especially movies set around music clubs. And what's the movie Streets of Fire, where it's also basically a musical, just more culty? You get the sense that the figures in those scenes they're not mainstream America. They're people who are edgier and maybe prone to crime in some of those other films. It comes so close to being super sleazy, but shies away.
The foregrounding of like toxic masculine behavior in these films is a way of saying, hey, they're really straight, guys. Don't worry. It's not like as queer as you think from the music and the imagery.
And the dancing.
Yeah, it's overcorrecting in some bizarre way to say, they're so manly, they're gonna slap a bitch. That's how they have to.
They're so manly, they're gonna throw a bitch in a dumpster.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Even though I love that Morris himself gets thrown in the trash at the end of the movie. Nice little balance.
That like jousting scene almost when the kid shows up on his motorcycle. Apollonia has some of my most favorite lines in this movie and some of the most quotable lines for me.
You think you scared me. You didn't.
That line, that's one of my favorite things ever.
Her lines all make her seem so dumb.
Oh, yeah.
At times, it's really endearing, but at other times, I'm like, okay, where's Vanity? Vanity wouldn't put up with this shit.
No, when he starts just being creepy for its own sake to try to scare her in his bedroom, it's just that's actually a thing that he does in Under the Cherry Moon as well, but he does it as a Bela Lugosi thing, where it's like he's like deliberately trying to do the Dracula move. It's just like, where's this coming from? I don't know, but
the need to be edgy and dangerous and mysterious, but dude, there's a time and a place.
You need to have your sunglasses on inside the club. You need to like circle around in like a very weird way so that you can't see him, and then he'll just disappear. Like that's how you be creepy.
And it is creepy. As much as I love Prince and his music, and as much as I love Purple Rain, I feel like it tells you everything you need to know about Prince as a person, and a lot of his ego issues and hang-ups with women and feelings of competition and people being disloyal, and just you get this air of he's never really able to let his guard down or trust anyone. It makes the film so sad in a way.
I always think about how sad it is that him and Morris, like after this film came out, like Morris was just done with the entire project. He was being worked really hard. He was having to split his money with the rest of the time. He got like $50,000 or something for making Purple Rain. Like it was some amount that was like, considering how huge that movie was, like he did not get rich off of it. I know he said he's not a workaholic in some interview that I heard. And so he's just like, the process of making a movie is tough. Like he didn't show up for certain scenes. Like when Jerome shows up to give the tickets, like that was supposed to be a Morris Day scene. Like he didn't show up that day. And so this was creating tension for Prince. You're my old friend and you're not even showing up for shooting on the movie that's going to change my life. Like, what are you doing? Like, these kind of fights, beyond the fact that like, he altered the time by firing Jam and Lewis, it just was not fun for them anymore. And it's sad because when the time started out, the first Time record is just Prince and Morris playing together. There's no Time band. It's just them as friends making funk records. And for that to become something like this awkward professional dynamic, even when it gets back to Graffiti Bridge, it's the money changes everything kind of problem with friendship. And just, so that's something that the film doesn't really address. It's just like, oh, Baby I'm a Star works even for Morris and Jerome. They're dancing in the audience. But in real life, that friendship was destroyed by that film.
I was reading that recently Prince's estate, I don't want to say they sued him, but they like issued him a warning that he's not allowed to use Morris and the Time as an entity or pay them. And it's just like, okay, like, can you just let this end?
He made a record as the original Seven, like the Time reunited as the original Seven. They weren't allowed to use the Time because Prince controlled the name. It's just, it's crazy.
Yeah, you mentioned Morris at the very end. It's amazing how those last three songs really tell such a story. You know, to have Purple Rain where it's, dedicated to his father. This is a song that some of the girls in the band wrote, and he just embraces so many things all at that moment. And then you get to see as that song plays out, and then as the subsequent 2 songs play out, you get the shots of Apollonia in the audience. And it's like when he is saying like, I'll never hit you, I'll never lie, I'll never do this and that. It's like all sung to her. And then you get, Baby, I'm a Star. And it's just like this, it's basically a victory lap. He's just like, okay, I'm the star, and here I'm going to dance my fucking ass off in these amazing, like Spanish pants or matador pants or whatever he's got on. It's remarkable how, again, that's why I think that this is a musical, because it's telling stories through these songs, and that he's got all these moments in that those 3 songs together at the end of the film. It's just incredible. And there's so many moments where you're like, okay, it could freeze right here and be credits, or it could freeze right here and be the credits. And then when it finally does freeze, it's a weird shot that really wasn't a freeze frame. It just like cuts from one thing to the freeze frame. And I'm like, what the hell happened?
They just stopped.
Yeah. And then you get that weird, like, musical glitch kind of thing at the end, and then like suddenly it becomes like greatest hits from the movie. It just cut together, hard cuts. No, like, it's not a musical montage by any means.
It's edited by the director, so he clearly, like, that's clearly what he wanted to do, but I agree, it's a very weird way to do it.
Maybe he was just frustrated by the end. It was like, fuck it, here we go, we're done. It's important to end with Baby, I'm a Star, because he could have just ended with Purple Rain. If he were a normal person, he wouldn't have written the song. But if you were a normal person, you made a movie called Purple Rain, you should probably end it with the song Purple Rain, with everyone like swaying their arms in the club and people crying. But then it goes on to be a romantic song. But then he still has to return to the main point, which is he won the Battle of the Bands and he wants to be famous. Even if the whole movie he's saying, no, I'm a sensitive artist. It's, bitch, we know why you're here. And so does this movie.
Yeah, well, the way they sequence the album, like, it makes emotional sense to end it on Purple Rain. But the film, like you're saying, it's the victory lap kind of component.
What's weird, too, that they use the version of Baby, I'm a Star that has that backwards message, because there's 3 or 4 backward sequences in Purple Rain.
Oh, there's also we didn't talk about this, but the creepy scene where he brings her into his basement bedroom and she starts playing with I think that's an 8-track, and playing different samples, and she plays a sample of a woman moaning, and she gets a little bit like, oh, but she sounds like she's having a great time, and it's backwards. It's a woman crying.
Right.
You're just like, oh, God.
Yeah. And she's like, well, what did you do to her? It's like, oh, boy, I don't want to know.
Is the implication that it's supposed to be his mother?
I thought it was Jill Jones, but it could be his mother.
Okay, that's what I assumed, but I don't think I have any kind of actual dialogue basis for that assumption.
There's none. Jill Jones's character, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't she supposed to be like depressive or suicidal in the script at one? There's something that like spells out that she's an unhappy person and someone that has an infatuation with the kid. So I always thought that maybe that's how what she's meant to, but I don't know. It could be the mother.
That would make sense too.
Yeah.
You get that whole thing of how Clarence Williams III is like, I'm better than you because I don't write down my music. It's all in my brain. And then when the kid is going crazy and he's breaking up the basement and all this stuff, and he finds all of his dad's sheet music, and it's like, oh, okay, he's not better than I am, is how I took that.
Yeah, no, I that's how I took it too. Yeah, just that he's human as well as I am.
Also, that basement is full of secrets.
Yeah, you don't want to know what happens in that basement.
We all have a pretty good idea, though.
I forgot that before that final freeze frame that I was talking about, it's that they have to have the ejaculating guitar and then it cuts to the freeze frame. And I'm just like, I forgot that ever happens in the movie. I had to, I was just like, what? Really?
When there's an ejaculating guitar and it's an afterthought, that you've just got a lot of movie on your hands.
There's a lot.
Yes.
Of movie there. Yes. All right, we're going to take a break, and we'll be back with an interview with Alan Light, the author of Let's Go Crazy, Prince and the Making of Purple Rain, and we'll be back with that right after these brief messages.
Get ready to dive deep into the life, career, and unforgettable moments of the one and only Chevy Chase. Join us on an exciting journey through the illustrious career of this comedy icon as we explore his groundbreaking roles, behind-the-scenes stories, and timeless contributions to the world of entertainment. Each episode of the Chasing Chevy Chase podcast brings you expert analysis and nostalgic reflections on Chevy Chase's most iconic characters in classic films like National Lampoon's Vacation, Caddyshack, and Fletch. Whether you're a die-hard Chevy Chase aficionado or simply curious about the man behind the laughter, Chasing Chevy Chase is your go-to podcast for all things Chevy Chase. Tune in and join the conversation as we celebrate the life and legacy of a true Hollywood legend. Don't miss out. Subscribe now to Chasing Chevy Chase wherever you get your podcasts, and let the adventure begin.
You talk a little bit in your book about growing up in Cincinnati and all this, but how did you make that transition into writing about music and pop culture?
I really did grow up around it. My mother was a writer. She was actually a former dancer, and she was the dance critic for the Cincinnati Enquirer and for various magazines, journals. And so the idea that you would go to a performance and try to figure out what you saw and what you thought and how to communicate that was really just dinner time conversation, and a lot of time with her at the offices of the newspaper. Fun fact, whenever they would show the exterior in the WKRP in Cincinnati, the building that was the WKRP building was the Cincinnati Enquirer building. So it was the actual building where my mom worked. Why music? Why do we love the things we love? Who can answer that? I think from a very young age, it just felt like the thing that I wanted to be the closest to, wanted to figure out, wanted to understand. And so whether that was like book reports in 5th grade about some Elton John biography that I found, or writing for the high school paper, then going on and writing for the college paper and studying this stuff more seriously in college, it really was the only thing I ever seriously thought about doing and dedicated this kind of attention to.
How do you go from writing about music and then eventually writing about it professionally to then picking up book projects? Because you've written a ton.
I came up working in magazines. I started at Rolling Stone, started as an intern, then as a fact checker, and became a senior writer at Rolling Stone. Left there to go work on the launch of Vibe magazine. I was the founding music editor and then the editor-in-chief there for a number of years. And then we went through so much growth at Vibe that we ended up acquiring Spin. And I worked with both for a while and then took over and was editing Spin for a number of years. Left that along with my publisher to go launch a magazine of our own, which was called Tracks, which we published for a couple of years until we ran out of money. I think at that point really took a hard swallow and a hard look around and said, it doesn't really look like anything good is happening in the magazine space, as we continue to see to this day. I don't really see going back and taking a features editor job somewhere. So what is it that I like about this stuff? If it's not going to be that format, is it telling these stories, championing these artists, being as close to this community as I can, exploring this history, and being open to what are other ways to do that? And certainly writing books was a more natural extension of that. Scary at first and remains scary even as you can continue to do it over the years. But also I ran a benefit concert series for a number of years for an organization called Housing Works here in New York City that works with homeless people with AIDS to provide shelter and medical services and other services for them. So that was a way to remain active and engaged. And then I got approached by somebody putting a channel together at Sirius that was a music talk channel that we launched in 2016 and did for 6 or 7 years until that channel went away. I think that continuing to pursue this stuff requires an openness to shape-shifting, because you don't know what it's going to look like. You don't know which opportunities are going to be there. You don't know what's going to come and what's going to be taken away. But if it is storytelling, in some ways it would become a very cliched word, but if that's what it is, and this is the environment and this is the community that you want to be part of, trying to figure out, or at least trying to take advantage of different ways to do that as they present themselves or as you come up with them. So I fell into a couple of book projects, chased a couple of others. Every one of them has been very different, kind of how it evolved. But that's been a consistent piece of my life for the last dozen or so years.
Which kind of book was Let's Go Crazy? Was that a pursuit, or was that a fell into your lap?
I had done a book about the song Hallelujah, a book called The Holy or the Broken, that was actually my favorite, the most fun book for me to write, because it was the most surprising book for me to write, and got a lot of attention and some really nice reviews. Ultimately got optioned and turned into a documentary that came out 2 years ago now, but is still available on Netflix if you're curious. Hallelujah, Leonard Cohen, A Journey, A Song is up there. Coming off of that, this is like 2012 or something, and I had this, realized we were coming up on 30 years since Purple Rain, 30 years since 1984. I'd been kicking around this idea of doing something around the summer of 1984 in music, which this is incredible. It's the summer of not just Purple Rain, but Born in the USA and the Victory Tour and Madonna's Like a Virgin and everybody's first project after Thriller. And so all bets are off and everything just explodes. But realized that a lot of the stuff that I wanted to get at could sort of be contained within the Purple Rain story. I had done a lot of work with Prince over the years. I knew that he wasn't going to talk to me for a project like that, but I knew that if I went to the other, the band, people involved in the film, other people around him, if I went to them and said, I'm going to write a book about Prince, they would all say no. But if I went to them and said, I'm going to write a book about Purple Rain, talk to me about whatever you want. Talk to me about your involvement. Talk to me about whatever is you feel comfortable. That was something that I thought enough of them would participate in, that there was something that I could achieve, along with using all the stuff that I'd done with Prince over the years. And to bring it back to the first thing you asked, to my own history with the film and very clear recollection of the moment that it came out, my own experiences going in the moment that the album and the film were happening, that there was a way to look at all of that stuff and bring in some of the other sort of cultural forces of 1984. And that felt like that could be a book. So I went back to my editor who had done the Hallelujah book and said, look, I don't have time to do a full proposal, go and shop it, go deal with this and still get it out in time for the anniversary that's coming up. So I wrote like a 4-page letter and said, not really take it or leave it, but if you're into it, then let's figure this out and go, so that we can tie it into the anniversary that's coming up.
How much of a Prince fan were you in 1984?
Relatively psychotic for the time. My friends and I, I graduated high school in 1984. That summer is very neon bright in my memory, as it is for, I think, any of us for that summer between high school and college. My friends and I had been big Prince fans for a while at that point. We had, however, discovered him on, I think, the second record. I remember we got really, the first thing I remember was the video for Why You Want to Treat Me So Bad on the Prince, on the second album, and just took the top of our heads off, and loved Dirty Mind, and Controversy went, and then 1999 came out, and now we were in a very different place. He was becoming a big pop star, and he was having huge singles, and we went to see him on the 1999, the Triple Threat tour, and it just felt everything was going up. And here was this guy who really did bring together all of the stuff that we loved, brought together funk rhythms and hard rock guitar playing and soul ballad singing and could do everything and could do everything that we were interested in, we were listening to, we were trying to figure out this mysterious personality and all of this doused in this sexuality, which as high school students, obviously you're trying to figure out and living through. And then we get word that he's got a movie coming out. And that made as little sense as it still doesn't make any sense. That's the part when you take the Purple Rain story, when you look back and take it apart, that really defies any sort of logic, is how the hell did this guy at this point in his career go off and get this feature film made? We can come back to that. So I remember we were counting down. I remember the album came out first. The single came out first. I remember staying up with the cassette player set because at midnight, the radio station WBLZ in Cincinnati was going to premiere the first single, which turned out to be When Doves Cry, and recording it at midnight that night and having just listening to it over and over. That sound came out that didn't sound like anything that anybody had ever heard before. Waiting for the album, getting the album, waiting for the movie, going the opening weekend to the movie. And of course, going over and over with my friends from high school through the summer, and then getting to college and everybody's bonding over that and going a bunch more times with all my new friends in college. So I saw it however many times over those few months. Went to see when the Purple Rain tour came through. It was by the next spring that I was able to go see it, but it was the spring of '85 to go and see the tour. I was all in at that point, as so many of us were, and really never lost that, and made it very hard to keep it together when I was in his presence and spending time with him for a couple of different magazine stories over the years. That awe never went away.
Yeah, how does Prince even get a movie made? Because this is not the golden time of musicals. We've had The Jazz Singer, we've had Sgt. Pepper's, we've had The Apple, you mentioned One Trick Pony in the book. So it's not like this natural thing. Oh yeah, that's the next step in his evolution.
No, two things. One is it wasn't natural for anybody. I mean, there were just disastrous. There was One Trick Pony. You say, Paul McCartney did Give My Regards to Broad Street that same year, which is just a debacle. And so Mick Jagger had tried to be a movie star and made just these awful. Free Jack comes out around that time. There was nothing that said it's an easy transition from being a rock star to being a movie star. And he had one top 40 hit at that point. Depending, he had maybe one, maybe two. Little Red Corvette had been the sort of the crossover song, and then 1999 came back and recharted. But even 1999, the first time it came out, wasn't a big pop single. They actually relaunched it after Little Red Corvette, and it became a hit single. But he had just moved up to being an arena headliner. He had just moved up to really having any awareness outside of a hardcore R&B black radio following. But he had this vision. He said, he went to his manager and he said, I want to make a feature film and you're going to get me a deal for that, or you're fired and I'm going to find somebody who can. And the band all talk about, he had this notebook that he would carry around with him, and on the plane between tour stops, he'd be writing in it. He'd say, yeah, I'm working on the movie. And they were all like, yeah, sure, Prince. Okay, of course, you're working on the movie. But it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense in terms of where his career trajectory was, in terms of where his visibility was. And as you said, in terms of what it meant for a musician to go carry a film like that. But again, this is this explosive moment after everybody saw what MTV could be. Hearing from the executives at Warner Brothers, they said, if he can do it cheap enough, we'll get a soundtrack album. It'll cover making the videos. It's not that big a risk for us. Okay. We'll structure a deal that's not going to really put us out for too much. We're waiting on a next album anyway. And who knows where this video stuff is all going. And I think that was really the small bet that they were placing was, I don't know, if the videos can be the trailer for the film and the then maybe it all works, which is absolutely what happened, absolutely what the project became. And to their credit, I guess, Warner Brothers really did always have this reputation. Even at that point, it wasn't what it was, but as the most artist friendly, we get great artists and let them do what they're going to do. There was a movie division and a music division, so we'll hammer it out and we'll figure something out. And damn if he didn't go make it happen. Not that it was an easy road. They wanted to, as I talk about in the book, there was a moment of wanting to go forward with the film, but not having Prince play the kid. There's this moment, if this is true, where his manager says that the Warner Brothers movies executives were like, we'll do it, but we want John Travolta in the lead, which is just fantastic to think about. But he holds the line, and somehow this thing gets done.
How does William Blinn get involved? And have you ever had a chance to read the Dreams screenplay?
I know that the Dream screenplay is circulating and I've read parts of it, but I haven't read the full thing. And I think he's just somebody who was, as near as I can tell, he was recommended. Bob Cavallo Prince had several managers. It was Cavallo, Fagnoli. There were three guys, but Bob Cavallo, who was an industry legend and had managed like The Lovin' Spoonful, he was the one of the management team who's tasked with, you're the Hollywood guy, figure out this movie thing that he's talking about. And he said that William Blinn was somebody who, I don't know if somebody else knew him or was recommended to him, but they met. William Blinn was really a TV, right? He had worked on, most notably, he had worked on Roots. That was he had worked on Fame. He had some experience within the sort of the biggest African-American TV moment of all time, and some within the kind of musical showbiz, whatever. Okay, let him take a crack at it. From all accounts, the meetings between William Blinn and Prince were awkward and they really didn't click. But he got enough of a sense to go off and write something of a script. In the meantime, Prince was working on a version of the script on his own. And that was enough. As you said, it was initially called Dreams in the William Blinn draft, to have something that they were taking around, that there was at least a first pass at this thing, that they started to go out and shop.
When does Magnoli get involved, and how does he earn the trust of Prince? Because obviously he's a young kid at this point, both of them, but he's not even a director at this point.
No, he's just out of USC Film School. He had won a student film prize for a project that he had done at Southern Cal. As Bob Cavallo tells the story, he went to a screening of a film. Maybe you remember the title if you've looked more recently than I can't.
I think it's Reckless.
Something like that. It's one word. Reckless sounds right. James Foley was the director, is what I remember. And somebody said he should see this film, see this director, whatever. He went to some screening room, saw the film, thought it was okay. There was some other guy who was there, some kid who asked, how'd you like the movie? And he said, I thought it was okay. I thought it was edited pretty well. And the kid was like, oh, I edited that. And that was Al Magnoli. And that was how they met. And he pitched himself as somebody who could take a crack at this film. There are many contrasting versions, not shy about his own self-mythologizing. So there are multiple versions of every story, but whatever it is, he did earn Prince's trust. They did have meetings, and those did go more successfully than the meetings with William Blinn. And he said, that script is crappy. That's not it. But here's what we can take from that, and here's what the story is. And he said he had a really clear sense of it. He did his pitch of what the story should be. And Prince said, you get it. You get my story. How do you know all this about me? And he's like, I don't know anything about you. And Prince like, no, but you're telling my story. You see what I'm talking about. And they connected sufficiently that Prince signed off on going forward with, as you said, this kid, which in some ways I'm sure is, very much to the advantage of the project, that it was somebody who was younger and less experienced and more malleable. And say what you will about Albert Magnoli, he winds up not only directing this film, he's the director of record on the Sign of the Times film, and for a period he is actually Prince's manager. So he built a lasting working relationship out of this project with some experience in film, no experience in music or music management, but an extended and increasingly close relationship to an artist who is difficult to manage and difficult to keep that kind of a relationship going.
When it comes to the movie itself, how does Prince's parents, how do they react to the way that they're being portrayed on film?
It's an interesting question. They're there. His mother went to the Minneapolis premiere. I can't remember which is which. The parents really, the whole parents thing is really, in some ways, the most interesting thing to think about, because we all know there's lots of limitations around Purple Rain. This is not a great piece of filmmaking. But first of all, it's good enough as a vehicle for what it was really about, which was presenting this incredible presence and character and charisma and performer that Prince was, and a story that was a little bit more than the bare minimum that you would need to get there. And a lot of it, when you talk to the band about it, the sort of band dynamic stuff, it's not a documentary, but they all say that those issues of how much would he let us contribute, how much was this him imposing a vision, it's the essence of the right thing about the creative tension within the band. The parents thing, though, is the most obviously fictionalized part of this story, but we didn't know any. We knew so little about him at that time that the fact that his mother is white in the film, a lot of the world just assumed, okay, that's the Prince story. And of course, his mother is both of his parents are black. But he wouldn't, because he wouldn't answer anything. He wouldn't really answer that, and kept this mystery, kept these what was true and what was not true in play. And when so much of the rest of it, and the rivalry between the bands and the rivalry within the band and all of that stuff is rooted in reality, and the parents thing is this one thing that's really not, where does that piece come from? And from all accounts, Prince's initial version of the story, his vision of the story, was this even like much darker, that his father had already killed himself. I believe that in his version of the story, his father had already committed suicide prior to the story. Of course, in the film, he tries, but then unsuccessfully. But where he wanted to go with the parents' story was like even harsher and bleaker than what we get in the film. So I don't know what the psychology, how much of that is that it's a better dramatic, whatever it is in terms of feeding the story, or what was that really about? Where did that piece of it come from? Is the most interesting thing to try to figure out within the making of and the evolution of the film.
You mentioned that when you went to college after the movie came out, that you and your friends would quote a lot of bad Apollonia lines, and I'm curious, what were some of those?
Oh God, I don't remember. It's too long to remember the word for word quotes, but it is certainly true. And some of the better Morris Day lines. I don't know if you've watched it with an audience recently.
No, I've never had a chance to see it with an audience.
That's the interesting thing now, is to see, because there's lots of like Latter-day Prince fans, and they see it, and there's really like dumb misogyny, slapstick cruelty. There's stuff that really doesn't play well many decades later. It was a certain thing at the time, and to watch it on your own is one thing. To watch that with an audience and feel the air go out of the room when Jerome dumps the woman in the trash can and some of those other things, you really become aware of, this is of another time and place. That's the stuff. And as you've probably read, Purple Rain is being adapted into a Broadway musical right now. That was just announced. And that's a lot of that is the stuff that they're really going to have to figure out how to recontextualize. I think that we'll see. You could imagine it working as a Broadway musical. You can imagine it not working at all and being terrible. And there's a lot, obviously, that rides on who plays the lead and if they're able to pull it off. But there's a story. There's a very classic old school musical story that's within here. They're going to have to flesh it out. They're going to have to add more songs. There's a lot to be done. But figuring out how to massage that tone and the kind of humiliating Apollonia and in the waters of Lake Minnetonka and like some things that are fairly iconic that you can't erase, but have to find another way to frame that, I think is clearly one of the challenges for doing a modern day version.
Ellen, don't you know what this means? This means that we can finally see Purple Rain with John Travolta like it was meant to be.
It's all the opportunity is back in front of us, but it'll be interesting. Again, the album is obviously just the Prince stuff. If you also have the Time songs, the Apollonia 6 songs, some of the other things that didn't make the final cut. There was a song that Jill Jones, who has a minor role, was supposed to do in an early cut of the film. There's some other things, like there's a lot within the Purple Rain project that you can expand. And then other stuff from the catalog. It'll be interesting to watch. See what they do.
Have you ever seen the Nigerian version of Purple Rain?
I've seen pieces of it, and I've seen Mdu Mokhtar, that guy, I've seen play many times. Incredible guitar player. It's wild that it exists. It's a tremendous thing to see. You don't fully know how to process something like that, like how to evaluate it, but it's pretty astonishing that it's actually is out there.
Why didn't Morris Day become a huge movie superstar?
It's a good question, and for those who are curious, I point them to Morris actually wrote a memoir a couple of years ago that's not bad, that has interesting stuff about Prince and his relationship to Prince, but also about his journey. And I think he went for too much too soon. Everybody saw the movie and pointed at, okay, Prince is going to be Prince, but Morris really has this sort of comic presence, and that guy could go be a comedy star. And the Time broke up before, I don't know if it's technically before the movie came out, but before the tour. They weren't on the tour. They were already done. They were already gone. Morris had left to go and moved to Hollywood to go do and there were a couple of projects. There were a couple of TV projects. He went into a bad drug phase. And Cavallo says that the talk was that they were kicking around ideas that there was talk at one point of a sequel. And the sequel was really going to be the Time story. That the sort of the Prince, you would have Prince enough to set it up, but then it would go off and be the Time story. And that would really be the thing with, first of all, that the band exploded before that was possible. And that there was just too much between Prince and Morris. I mean, a sense from Morris of like, I'm the star around here, which does not fly anywhere within Prince world. So he did a clean break, but it wasn't the right projects, or he was becoming too difficult for and he says this in the book, too difficult for what his stature was at that point. And it is a shame. It does feel like that's the lost opportunity. Was there could have been this other career for him that just didn't come together.
How did Graffiti Bridge come about?
Too many people saying yes to Prince and not enough people saying no. The next film project was Sign of the Times. Sign of the Times is one of the great concert films of all time. It had its own fraught. They shot it in Europe, but then the sound was messed up and they had to reshoot a lot of it on a soundstage at Paisley Park. And Sign of the Times isn't everything that it could have been, but it is in a lot of ways the great document of Prince as performer at his peak with an unbelievable band. But he got talked into, or Magnoli did, or somebody, a really bad distribution deal where they basically tried to do, and this is the thing about Prince, the ideas were usually right. History, in the same way that all the things we thought he was nuts for, fighting with his record label and wanting ownership of his masters and all of that stuff that now is what every artist thinks about and talks about. Or I'll distribute my music on the internet. What are you talking about? That's crazy. And he didn't have the infrastructure to do it, but the idea was right. And his idea for Sign of the Times was really much like what Taylor Swift recently did with the Eras film, which was, we're going to go around the studios and we're going to lease it directly to theaters. But it wasn't, Taylor did that as one deal with AMC that way. And as I understand it, he really tried to put together, they were out going door to door, like putting this together through different theaters and different theater chains. And then they're this kind of in between, the person who was the company representing them for distribution went out of business, and Sign of the Times kind of never got its shot. Is the end result of this that's why it wasn't available for many years on video. The rights were a disaster. Like, that was a mess. So I think that he wanted to prove that he could, still compete at the movie game. And by this time had Paisley Park, had this sort of self-contained studio space, shooting space, all of that, and said, we can just do all of this, and took everything in-house to make that film. And he was the huge star that he was. He had just recently signed the biggest deal of all time with Warner Brothers. We know how that ends up working out, but soon after that deal, I think nobody was he's going to make a movie. Okay, he's going to make a movie. I don't think anybody was going to stop him. And it's terrible. What is there to say? Say what you will about Al Magnoli. And the interesting thing about Purple Rain is it is the most collaborative that Prince really ever allowed himself to be. It was still his vision and him calling the shots and all of that. But from everybody around him, he really did go into it with this sense of, I'm going to learn how to do this. I'm going to watch. He watched every shot. He was there for everything. He was right over the director's shoulder. He was still giving a lot of instructions, but he was listening enough to somebody who said, okay, we're going to need this many cameras for coverage, and this is how we're going to shoot the live stuff. And he was a sponge in that way. He was taking all of that in. It was the most that he worked. So he did work with the band. He wanted to push the band. He knew that to be a rock star, he couldn't be the weird guy in the basement playing all the instruments himself and just be a mad genius. If he was a badass guitar slinging guy leading a rock band, that was going to resonate bigger to a bigger audience. And so that was what he was presenting. And as a result, the band had much more input, have more writing credits, participated in the Purple Rain stuff in a different way than anything before or after. But by the time he made this project that everybody told him, don't do it, it'll never happen, it's a terrible idea, he does it and becomes the first person in history with a simultaneous #1 film, album, and single. Why is he going to listen to anybody ever again? Why is he going to listen when somebody says no the next time? And that in some ways becomes the great undoing. This tension in Prince between wanting to be a cult artist who could do whatever he wanted at any time and the biggest superstar in the world. He could be both of those things, but to be both of those things at the same time, everything's got to lock in together in the way that it did for Purple Rain and in the way that it did at other moments in his career, but not in any sort of sustainable way. And by the time you hit Graffiti Bridge, it's a one-man show, and it's a one-man show doing something that he may be the greatest musician in the world, but he ain't the greatest director or screenwriter in the world, and that's what's going to go up on the screen.
I had heard how prolific Prince was, and I had understood that he just always wrote. But when you're telling these stories about, oh yeah, they needed another song, so it comes back the next day with 2, and they're completely done. And one of them's When Doves Cry.
And one of them's When Doves Cry, yes, written on assignment overnight. There's nothing to say. Spending time around Prince, music just came out of him in a way that the rest of us just can't understand. We can't understand it. We can't know what that is. And he created a world. Being around Prince, you entered this world where he was inside a bubble that nothing touched him, that he didn't bring in, that he didn't want. And it was constructed so that he could create at any time, anywhere. And this is a different world. This isn't, you can record on your laptop wherever you are. This is before all of that. So if he's in Dayton and it's 3:00 in the morning and he has an idea, there's a studio on standby. There's an engineer on standby. Everybody gets that call. The band knows. The phone rings in the middle of the night. You report for duty. And if it's the middle of I always love this story. This Susanna Melvoin, who was Wendy's twin sister, and she was Prince's girlfriend at one point, and she was the singer in the Family. She actually was the singer on the original Nothing Compares to You before Sinead did it. She said she'd be, when she was living with Prince, she'd be home. It'd be the middle of the night. The phone would ring. She'd answer it. He'd say, "What are you doing?" She'd say, "I'm sleeping." He'd say, "Wrong answer. I'm cutting hits." Click. And that's what it was. That's what it was all day, every day when he was on tour. And it would be 3 hours of sound check and a 2.5-hour show. And then most nights when he felt like it, a 2-hour after show at some club somewhere. He would have that band playing 6-7 hours a day, every day.
When the whole thing of them watching themselves back and him like, "Oh, change that. Don't do that. Do this when."
And reviewing film like a football coach. Reviewing film and this is good, do that again. This, you missed this step, do this other thing. That was, you would do the show and then you would go back and review the show. And then you would go out and play a club show. That was everything. And I think again, just to go back to Purple Rain, I do think that the successful part of the film is that it does convey at least that some of that feeling. So it's really easy to dump on Purple Rain. It's really easy to say it's a bad B movie and it's corny and the performances are great, but the rest of it is just junk. And a lot of it is junk and they're amateur actors and amateur dancers, but there is some essence of truth in that film. There is some essence of emotional something. That's the reason we reacted to it. You went to, of course, it opens with that performance of Let's Go Crazy, and you don't care what happens after that because that is so incredible. But to go back again and again, they're very smart. It never goes more than about 10 minutes of drama without going back to a music performance. The balance is very well maintained. And there is a feeling, and there is that feeling of this guy and this sort of obsessive nature and the crazy psychology of what it is that made this guy. That's as much as he revealed. And it's not a documentary and it's not an autobiography and the character is not the same as him. But we were so fascinated with it because it did feel like that. And it felt like that because there was some of that behind it that was an actual thing.
So what are you working on these days?
I just launched a podcast just recently. We did this, as I said, I had this show on Sirius for 6.5 years. My co-host is Mark Goodman, who was one of the original MTV VJs. And we did this music talk show and had a great time and did thousands of episodes. They took our channel away and they gave it to Conan O'Brien when they wrote him a $50 million check or whatever it was. So there you go. But we have relaunched the show and it's called Sound Up with Mark Goodman and Alan Light, available wherever podcasts can be found. And we're doing that 2 times a week. And the same thing, talking about music, news and topics and issues and guests and interviews and whatever, and trying to see how this feels doing it in this format. And I've started working on my next book, which I guess I can say, it's not a secret. I'm just a little superstitious about talking about it. But the short version I will say is it is about the continuing, ever-growing allure of Fleetwood Mac's Rumors album. Why is it that is the one classic rock album that kids continue to love in a way that other stuff just sounds old and that one doesn't? So that's the sort of wading deeper and deeper into.
Well, Mr. Light, thank you so much for your time. This was great talking with you.
Absolutely a pleasure.
right, we are back and we are talking about Purple Rain, and we mentioned a few times the sequel, Graffiti Bridge, because he made, 3 films after this? There was Under the Cherry Moon, Sign of the Times, which is a concert film, and then Graffiti Bridge, and I had not seen any of those. I mean, here I hadn't seen Purple Rain, so I was just good to be able to see that one. And I just knew from the zeitgeist that the others weren't that good. I heard Sign of the Times is good, and I'll have to check that out. But I did finally sit down and watch Graffiti Bridge this morning, and that was something. That was really something. I don't know why I did that to myself. You know, you mentioned Streets of Fire. I was reminded of that, and I was also reminded of One from the Heart. This whole idea of these, like, stage-bound, I guess this goes back to, like, the MGM musicals, but this, like, stage-bound musical where you're just in this fake world. And that is very much Graffiti Bridge. I think it was all shot at Paisley Park. And that was kind of cool that it was playing with that a little bit. I think there are maybe a handful of shots that were shot outside, but everything is taking place in this world. But man, oh man, they were laying on the symbolism so thick, and that it becomes, you know, you mentioned him becoming a Jehovah's Witness, and the spirituality in this movie is just intense. One of the characters, the main love interest in the movie, is an angel, and it's painful to watch.
It's a very peculiar film. And it's funny because it's technically a sequel to Purple Rain, but like in terms of the style and tone, it's such an extreme departure that it's like an odd, like you're saying, a set-bound fantasy. I don't know if he was influenced at all by visiting the set of Batman and Tim Burton's way of constructing something all on a soundstage, but it's all of the reality of Purple Rain is abandoned. And it has a love triangle dynamic. It has competition with Morris Day and the Time. It has things that pay lip service to the things that are dramatically there in Purple Rain. His parents are addressed through dialogue. He's writing letters to his dead father because in the original script for Purple Rain, the father's suicide attempt maybe was more successful than the ambiguous kind of way it's treated in the final film, where you think he's probably going to live because I Would Die For You is so catchy that it's going to raise the dead. But like in the film that we have now, like he's dead and he's writing these like sad letters to his father. He's still playing music that the crowd is not always into, but we agree with the crowd more in this one because it's like all these kind of subpar, like more religious themed kind of songs. There are a lot of good songs from different projects that are also in Graffiti Bridge. Like Joy and Repetition is a song that a lot of Prince fans were into the bootleg scene before that came out in Graffiti Bridge, and the Time stuff is okay. Something about it feels impenetrable. Like when you talk about the spirituality, I don't really know what we're supposed to get from it. And the efforts at sentimentality don't land because it's just all so cryptic. And the humor in it is also very uncomfortable and crazily homophobic at one point. The misogyny is more chauvinism than actual violence, but it's still a wildly sexist film. That ended his movie aspirations. After that, you have things that he shot like for home video and for television, but it's like the last film that he really aimed at a theatrical market with it. He took it so badly that he had back-to-back critically and commercially like disastrous films. Warner Brothers was like, "You are not a filmmaker, Prince. I'm sorry." But it's also at a weird time for him musically because it's like 1984, he could be considered cutting edge. Like he's somebody that is like hip hop is starting to happen. Heavy metal is getting more extreme, but he's still able to be this controversial cutting edge figure. 1990, it's like you have NWA and Public Enemy. You have Slayer. You have like other things that are going to make him seem like very safe no matter what he does. So he leans into New Jack Swing because this is the era of Bobby Brown. He's leaning into rock, but like his rock becomes increasingly unconvincing after Purple Rain. And I think he realizes that he lost the black audience in a major way, that like by the time of some Sign of the Times on, he's making concerted effort to get the black audience back. And that Graffiti Bridge is pitched to a black audience in a way that Purple Rain is not. Like, he brings in George Clinton, he brings in Mavis Staples, like he foregrounds an R&B sound, Tevin Campbell. He's going for the people that were like making New Edition to stars. And even like lip service to hip hop. And he makes it work, at least commercially, the next year with Diamonds and Pearls, where he's like tentatively embracing all that stuff in a way that like connects. But Graffiti Bridge is like that awkward bridge, between the 80s stuff and the 90s stuff that just falls between two stools as far as who it's even really appealing to outside of hardcore Prince fans. So yeah, it's a kind of a sad footnote to Purple Rain, but not enough people saw it to for it to even register as like a proper sequel. It's almost like one of those films, like when Godard makes sequels to Breathless. It's, yeah, fuck you, I'll make your sequel. But it's like there's nothing to really connect it.
Like Nouvelle Vague, where people are like, sure, we'll give you money because we think you're going to make a film about the new wave. And he's, okay, give me a second. But I almost feel like that later stage of his career, to me, the real tragedy is a strong word, the real frustration of that post 1987-ish shift in Prince's career is, and it's not unique to him, but this thing seems to happen where when somebody gets famous and they make a shitload of money and they convince people that they're a genius, they no longer take any editorial comments, no criticism. And it's like, you just think that everything you do is incredible. It will lead you to Graffiti Bridge, so let it be a lesson.
That year, When Doves Cry was all over the radio, but it was via MC Hammer as Prey. It was like he was still there, but he was already like a figure of the past that was being reappropriated. So it was like, that was also part of, like, his desire to be hot was part of the problem, because he didn't want to be Todd Rundgren. Like, he didn't want to be Lindsey Buckingham. Like, he wanted to be the biggest person. And he can come up with great songs that way, but it also, yeah, like you're saying, he doesn't listen to anybody because he was right so many times before. Like, how could he ever be wrong? And it's, look at Graffiti Bridge and you will find out.
I don't know if you guys remember this, but there's this really funny Dave Chappelle skit that's basically when keeping it real goes wrong. To me, that's like later Prince in a nutshell. It's like he's trying so hard, and it's just trying too hard.
Well, by the time you get to Buttless Pants on MTV and you change your name to the symbol, like there's all the stuff that kind of makes him ridiculous by the 90s. And he has to tone it down and come back as a retro figure and start playing Purple Rain stuff again. And basically embracing the fact that he's like an older guy. He's not going to be quite as edgy, but he'll play the songs you want to hear live, and he'll be polite, and he toned it down. But Graffiti Bridge and that period still like him thinking he can try anything and even make a more overtly religious film and have it make the same impact as Purple Rain. Because Let's Go Crazy has religious lyrics that are just buried. Like are we going to let de-elevator being devil? He's doing the Christian rock thing in disguise then, but he's getting more overt with it by the time you get to Love Sexy and Graffiti Bridge. And this turns off lots of people.
What a baller move it is to have Dave Chappelle go on TV, tell this whole story about Prince and cooking pancakes for breakfast, and then having Prince release a single with the image of Dave Chappelle dressed as Prince with the plate of pancakes.
Genius.
Fucking amazing. And Chappelle's just like, what am I going to do? Sue the guy?
Seriously, I feel like that's the sort of thing that, like, when you can laugh at yourself and it's, all right, I'm not gonna let someone else become famous because they're telling a story about me without me also capitalizing on it.
Yeah, he was on Sesame Street when he had to change the name of the symbol, and like someone's, what do we call you? And like he was making fun of his own like absurd situation, like with.
I love that episode.
I'm guest starring on the show tonight.
And your name, sir?
This is gonna be fun. I'm the artist formerly known as Prince.
Ooh, and I'm the bear currently known as Not Amused. Now, your name again, please.
My name has no sound. It's unpronounceable.
Look, fella, this kind of monkey business might have kept you out of the draft, but you ain't gonna fool me. Now, how would your name appear on my list here?
Like this.
Oh, okay, Dr. Rorschach, I'll play along. I see my mother and a butterfly doing the mambo on an orange.
Just check the list, fool.
Pretty mouthy for a guy with no name. Okay, let's see. We got railroad crossing, that yin-yang sign. We got... Hey, will you... Boy, security in this place stinks.
I was very delighted when I finally tracked down Rain, The Color of Blue with a little red in it. I guess it's Nigerian remake of Purple Rain. Remake, quote unquote. I mean, it's very loosely based, but it's pretty remarkable. Did you guys get a chance to see that one?
I saw it a few years ago, but for some reason I don't have super clear memories of it.
Yeah, I saw it played in Philly. It's Christopher Kirkley, who's like a Portland-based music label head. But I guess it is a Nigerian. I don't know, because like is Tuareg? What's the language that they're speaking? They described it as like the world's first Tuareg language fiction film. Like I know that's how.
Oh yes. Yeah. I remember this description of it. Yeah.
Which I don't know. That's what I've read. I don't know if it's true, and I might be butchering the pronunciation of the language.
So Tuareg is it's a language group closely related with Berber languages and dialects. They are spoken by the Tuareg Berbers in large parts of Mali, Niger, Algeria, Libya, and Burkina Faso. So they talk a lot. There's a few times where like his love interest goes off to Libya. They do talk about, I have been from this place to this place, because it's all, and I didn't realize I'm kind of not that great when it comes to world music, but yeah, the main character, Madhu Mokhtar, I believe is how you say his name, that he is a real life guitar player, and that this is him playing the guitar throughout this whole thing, dressed in this great purple robe, and then he's got the whole headdress thing and hides his face through a lot of it, and it's slow. It's very slow moving. The music is not as driving as you are expecting from like Prince, you know. It's more like almost jam type stuff where it feels like they're just kind of making stuff up as they go along. But I also, since it's such a foreign concept to me, almost all the music sounds the same. So when the Morris Day character steals the song from Madhu, I'm just like, okay, they all kind of sound alike. You could just make up something else. But that sounds very, very culturally xenophobic. So I apologize.
Yeah, the biggest difference is like the way the music is discovered by people, because it's like radio, but it's also cell phone recordings, which I guess is how Madhu Mokhtar like initially built his audience, was just like this pirate trading of files, which is something totally alien to the Purple Rain. Like that technology didn't exist in the 80s, but and also, since you mentioned the jamming nature of it, like it foregrounds like musicians playing with one another in a way that maybe Purple Rain doesn't. But yeah, but it hits a lot of the same beats as far as tensions with the father, like rivalry with local musicians, the discarded jewelry and the symbolic nature of jewelry sharing with the love interest, even just overcoming arrogance and playing your bandmate's song is like a way to achieve ultimate like personal victory in the climax. There's beats that come from Purple Rain. Even the way the opening is edited is like Purple Rain, like the font choice for the title. And he's watching Purple Rain on TV, but then they don't really lean too hard into making it like, it's not campy. Like it's like they're just trying to tell the same story, but it's not, there's not like a lot of nudge, wink, wink. Like it's like Purple Rain. Like maybe they're not trying to get sued. I don't know, but it's very different in a lot of ways. And musically, you're right. It's just rhythmically like very strange. It's more gentle, but it also feels like almost more dissonant maybe to my ears than pop music from the 80s.
When he makes her purify herself and like Debo, that scene made me laugh.
Yeah, that scene is actually funny because it's like the most genteel variation of it. Oh, I ran out of gas. Let's stay here. She's like, no, you didn't. The end.
Right. Goes over and turns on the motorcycle. It's just like, fuck you. Yeah. She's like, I saw the Thriller video. I know what you're doing. It made me realize so I did a screening during the pandemic. I was playing movies every Friday night, and this was one of the ones that I did, the Purple Rain remake. And it made me realize as I was watching it, I was like, oh, it's this story beat. It's this story beat. And so it was a lot of fun. I had a really good time watching that one. And I think it stands on itself. It doesn't feel like it's a remake. If you happen to know Purple Rain, great. But I think this is an independent movie. If you don't know Purple Rain, it's going to feel completely original.
Which is the gold standard for that kind of remake, is like being able to appreciate the influences if you're a fan of the original, but also being able to watch it as entirely its own thing.
Yeah, I didn't go back to it, but the film that actually remakes Purple Rain in its own way that was a big hit was 8 Mile, the Curtis Hanson film based on Eminem's biography. But that has so much that they take from the plot, from the love triangle, the competitive local music scene, the musical-driven climax. I was thinking even the way the lead-off single is a more rock-driven guitar sound with Lose Yourself versus a more black kind of foundation for the hip-hop that he does. That's, again, like Purple Rain embracing the larger white rock fan base to make your crossover biography movie that's also like a myth-building exercise.
Also, lots of ego there.
Not a lot of love for the ladies in either one.
No. We need like the Wendy and Lisa version of Purple Rain where they're just the full protagonists.
Yeah, and I didn't realize how immensely talented those two are, and just that they come from these rich lineages of musical families and that they've done so much post-Prince. It's terrific.
I remember finding out really only a couple years ago that they were like longtime partners. It's like on one hand, my head was blown, but on the other hand, I was like, that makes perfect sense.
I don't think they're romantically together anymore, but they're still partners like professionally. But even back in at the time, like the opening to Computer Blue, is the water warm enough? Yes, Lisa. Like people didn't know how to read it because again, like playing up the ambiguity of whether or not they were a couple was part of the many myths that they like having fun with the in a very homophobic era. So it's interesting.
My sense growing up in the late 80s and in the 90s was very much that people were more willing to accept gay men than they were to accept lesbians for a while. And to see women, or I guess growing up, I would hear more stories about, okay, here's an actor, a director, a musician who is mostly out and is gay and is just living on their own terms. Whereas I felt like I didn't hear that nearly as often about gay women. And so for them to be like openly playing with that in the 80s feels way edgier than, or at least as edgy as the way that Prince played with gender and sexuality.
At the time, this is before you get the cultural stereotype of lipstick lesbians and like lesbians that look like heterosexual sex symbols in movies. At that time, you were more likely to find the female prison warden kind of character or whatever. Or somebody that was like, yeah, playing up like negative stereotype or like histrionic women like Rebecca or whatever. Like you didn't have Wendy and Lisa type characters as like gay characters in movies. And so even though they don't really establish them as a couple outright, it's also like just a rare female rock star at that time. You have Joan Jett, you have a few people, Chrissy Hynde, but like for mainstream, this is the same time as Madonna, but Apollonia might fit that part of the equation. But for like guitar players of like Wendy's caliber, you didn't have a lot of them in general in pop music. And so,
and the way that she's very obviously with, and I know that Prince, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure Prince chose all of their outfits and they didn't really get too much of a say in how sexualized they were made to appear on stage. Like, I don't know if they were super against it, but it seemed if you want to be in the revolution, this is part of the package.
Gail Chapman used to be the keyboard player in the revolution, and part of the act involved her having to make out with Prince on stage every night as part of, and I don't know if that's what drove her out of the band or if there's other things, but when Lisa replaced her, it was like part of it was just like, yeah, that's the job, is to be like an overtly sexual character on stage. I don't know that Wendy is sexualized to the same degree as Vanity 6 or something.
No. I still think she manages, Wendy specifically, and this really comes through in Purple Rain, Wendy manages to be gorgeous and sexy while feeling kind of queer and a little bit androgynous. She's never talked about in the dialogue the way Apollonia is as being this just a target for predatory men around her.
Although there is the line calling out her period in a really cringy kind of way. So it's there is still misogyny aimed at her too.
Oh, sure. But she's a sex symbol in a different way without fully becoming an object.
Well, and there's that moment, and I can't remember if it's Baby I'm a Star or I Would Die for You, where she's basically giving Prince head on stage.
Yes.
Computer really, thank you.
Which I assumed was meant to be a David Bowie reference.
Yeah, it's a total Bowie, like Mick Ronson thing. Yeah. Yeah. She's super young, too. She's, like 18 or 19 years old in that movie? Like, it's...
But she kills it. And she's a great guitar player.
Very much, yeah. Yeah.
She also almost outdances Prince in certain scenes. She clearly understood the assignment.
Well, like, growing up with grunge and punk and all this stuff, I've never seen a band do the choreography like this. So to see the band, how they just are all moving together and stuff on the beat, I'm just like, that is so cool. I wish I could have seen
It's
a band
so
like
cool.
that. But, you know, Nirvana's not doing that stuff. Prong isn't doing that stuff. You know?
It'd be amazing if Prong did the choreography.
Wouldn't it be great? Or the Dwarves, you know?
Yeah.
What happened to all those Riot Girl bands? Did they not get the choreography memo? Come on,
yeah.
ladies.
Yeah, someone could bring out a mirror to Kathleen Hanna.
There you go. Oh my God. That is the moment, man. When I saw that the first time, when he's just like, you know, now Jerome. Oh my God.
Morris Day forgot the comb that day. He was supposed to have a comb on stage, and they just like, they'll just make it work without it.
He did, man. That whole thing, his whole, yes, I just love it.
That's another thing. I was reading up, Ed Guerrero wrote a book called Framing Blackness, the African-American Image in Film, that had a great chapter on 80s Black representation in film in the 80s. And he was talking about how so many films in the early 80s that had Black characters were buddy films that like had them with a white buddy. Like it's Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder, or
Billy Crystal and
Gregory Hines.
Yep.
Eddie Murphy and Nick Nolte, Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd. And for Jerome and Morris to have that buddy dynamic for so much of the film, that was really refreshing for people, because you have things back in the 70s like Uptown Saturday Night, but it's not, you don't really have a lot of that kind of stuff in the 80s. And when you get to 84, that's when the Cosby Show takes off. That's when there's something else that I'm trying to forget. But it's like when Thriller's the dominant thing. Like, it's an interesting time for Black representation in pop culture, because it's on the one hand becoming more segregated in some ways. But Purple Rain, I don't know, for some reason it like feels more like a Rainbow Coalition type movie than it maybe is. And I don't know, it's just a weird time because it's the Reagan era. It's a more conservative climate, and it's like a pushback towards a more Eisenhower kind of value system. So for Black entertainers to thrive despite that is interesting, because I don't know that people got necessarily more racist than they were in the 70s, but that culture tended to marginalize people in different ways, that the biggest people were still overpowering it anyway. Like the biggest movie stars, Eddie Murphy, the biggest TV stars, Bill Cosby, the biggest music stars, Michael Jackson, but they're still kind of not surrounded by other Black faces. Like when you have Eddie Murphy, he's in a white world, but he's the fish out of water. You don't get him with other like Black characters really until Coming to America and like things later on, like when he has more control. But I don't know.
Well, that's his whole thing. I mean, the fish out of water, going to Beverly Hills and experiencing that whole world and everything. And that was like, it's such a major hit for him to cross over with Beverly Hills Cop. And yeah, I totally agree with you that, I mean, just that MTV was so influential in helping this movie, but at the same time, MTV just 2 years prior, 81, whenever they started, were just like, yeah, no Black faces, please. We don't want any Black people on this channel.
Even if you think about like representation and how that affected Madonna's career, it's like when she starts to bring Black dancers, gay male dancers from, the name is escaping me, like with Vogue.
From the ballroom scene, yeah.
From the ballroom scene, and she's clearly also playing around with gender and sexuality in different ways, and then gets super slammed because of it. It just makes it so obvious how difficult that kind of representation was at that time, even though, like Bill said, all the biggest pop stars. So like, why are we still having this problem? And why are people fighting against it so badly?
Well, yeah, it's scary times, and you mentioned the PMRC. I mean, that was putting these people back in their place, both, metal acts, anybody that was on the fringe, because they weren't going after the mainstream acts. It was all the quote unquote fringe acts and black acts, rap, heavy metal, these types of songs and these artists. It was just like, no, go back in your cave. We don't want you out here. We're going to stick a label on your stuff so that it doesn't sell as well, when it had
we're going to stick a label on your stuff so all the kids know what they should actually be buying.
Yeah. And it was a lure to people like me and you as well. But at the same time, Walmart wouldn't carry that stuff. And it was still a way to censor records. It still worked in a way in some towns, but
it worked in a very real way in more rural middle America. Whereas if you grew up in or around a big city, you had lots of other record store options, but overall it hurt people.
Walmart was the only way to get music for a lot of people, which was just bizarre to think about. And then, that carried on for me into the early 90s with stuff like, we're not going to have the In Utero album available because of the controversial art, or the whole thing with Ritual de lo Habitual by Jane's Addiction. It's like, no, we have to have a different cover because there's naked puppets on the front of this album. We can't have that stuff.
Yeah, my favorite way of addressing that was Ministry had a dotted line around the parental advisory sticker on the live album in case you didn't feel like showing up, and you would get 2 copies of the booklet. So you could have one that was unblemished, and then you'd have one you could cut it out and mail it to Tipper Gore or whatever. It was just hilarious that they, at a certain point, I mentioned Eminem. By a certain point, it's just like that war was lost by whoever was trying to stop explicit lyrics from being on records. It's just like, this is just going to be the thing now. But yeah, Prince is right at that point where it's like the most innocuous record can still be the one that like brings the entire thing into courtrooms, into Washington, into like real dialogue. And I don't know, the heavy metal people got targeted more. Hip hop comes a little later, but like even Madonna, Dress You Up With My Love or whatever. It's like, how is that even like a thing to debate? It's G-rated.
All right, guys, let's go ahead and take another break and play a preview for next week's show.
This is Alfred Hitchcock. I have just succumbed to the craze for wide and splashy ties. I use them in my latest film, Frenzy, as a murder weapon used to strangle women. It's such an elegant way to go.
My God, the tie!
Frenzy is rated R, under 17, not admitted without parents.
That's right. Speaking of controversy, we'll be talking about Hitchcock's most controversial film, Frenzy, next week. Until then, I want to thank this week's co-hosts, Sam and Bill. So, Bill, what is the latest with you, sir?
Other than recent episodes of Genre Grinder and Directors Club, I haven't been podcasting as much lately. I've been working on a few Blu-ray releases. Not a whole lot I can announce yet, but I guess the most recent things I was on was a couple of Vinegar Syndrome releases. Amanda Reyes and I did commentaries for Fatal Games and for a film called Las Vegas Strangler, which is on a Lost Picture Show box set. And I wrote a booklet essay for the Radiance Films edition of Messiah of Evil. Those are the most recent things that I could promote.
And Sam, how about yourself?
By the time this episode is out, it should have started, but I am embarking on a year-long Fritz Lang series that I'm really excited about, working through his films chronologically and also thematically. And this should also be out by then, but I was interviewed for video extra on the upcoming Criterion release of Heroic Trio and its sequel, The Executioners, which I am super, super excited about. So those are probably the 2 biggest things.
Thanks again, folks, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They are all available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projectionbooth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.